Until 6, Tony Moclair.
Our next guest is a US writer who, in my humble opinion, combines wit with an uncommonly robust commitment to truth-telling. He's got a website that on the banner just reads, "I hate you for better reasons than you hate me." He has visited Australia before. He was a guest on John Safran's show with Father Bob in God's Safran versus God. His name is Jim Goad, and he joins me on the line from Atlanta, Georgia. Jim, thank you for your time.
Oh, hello, sir. How are you? Good day, or whatever. Shrimp on the Barbie, whatever the proper greeting is.
Now, you thought you might have picked some lingo up your first time in Australia, which was how many years ago?
That was in 2005, and the one that stuck was take the piss. Everyone was always taking the piss out of each other. Well,
I would like to see you try to popularise that as much as possible in your writing. You said you had...
Can you say that? Can you say that on the radio in Australia?
I think we'll just squeeze that one past the censors. Can you just tell me what happened the second time you tried to visit Australia? You said you were having problems getting back into the country.
Well, I was detained by customs the first time I went, and they let me go because I wrote what I intended to say on Safran's program. But then I was going down with a rather inept Australian independent filmmaker to do a film. I was going to stay there for 6 weeks, and I planned a layover in Honolulu for 2 days, and I did. And then when I got on the plane to Melbourne, they wouldn't let me on because my name had been earmarked, and it was Easter weekend, and apparently Jesus died and was resurrected somewhere in Australia because the Australian embassy in Honolulu was closed for 4 days, and I got tired of waiting and came back, which is ironic. I mean, I suspect I'm descended from convict laborers and indentured servants, as are many Australians, but it's kind of funny that they turn away ex-cons.
Well, you say ex-con because you spent time in prison.
Yes.
Can you, tell us what the offence was, and...
Okay, yes.
Yeah, go.
Part of the question.
Oh, well, the next part of the question, because I know you go to your website and you can actually hear the person who put you in jail. You can hear the audio of the voice messages she's left on your answering machine. But go, explain.
I did 2.5 years in a cage for hitting a woman back. Basically, yes, the URL would be jimgoad.net/sound/ANNE.mp3. You can hear her threatening to cut my head off, blow my head off, stalk me, asking me to turn over these tapes to the cops so she can go behind bars because she can't stay away from me, et cetera, et cetera. She bloodied my nose, and I beat her up. And don't feel bad about it because I think if the genders had been reversed, I would have been a hero. I'm all for treating people equally, but that doesn't seem to be what cultural Marxism or political correctness is about. It's basically they flipped the script, and white males are now the other, the cultural other, the despised member of the outgroup that needs to be demonized and hunted down and is guilty for everything, which I think is nonsense. I've met and known plenty of malicious and messed up women. I mean, my mom was bad. I'm not on speaking terms with my sister. I was schooled by nuns, and I think actually I'm less dehumanizing toward women than a lot of feminists are. I believe women are totally capable of being malicious, manipulative, having ill will, which I guess is the same thing as malicious. To me, that means they're human. And at some point, feminism changed from this equal treatment to this folk religion where we've got the innocent group and the perpetually guilty group. The woman that I went to prison over, she was planning to write a book called Milking the System, how you can make money and get guys in trouble by false rape and domestic violence charges. She actually, and I have a new book called The Headache Factory, and there's a screen capture of something she wrote on a group after I got out of prison where she admits that she falsely accused me of rape. This happens to a lot of guys. I think a lot of guys are just afraid to say anything. Because the thing is, a woman hits you, you bitch, you got beat up by a woman, but if you go to the police, you can't win.
Yeah.
If you let her beat you up, you're a pussy, and if you don't, you're a pussy too. There's really no. It's a lose-lose situation for guys.
Having listened to the audio online, Jim, and these are extremely explicit threats. How did they not play to your defence when you're actually in court?
the district attorney said that these were signs of a battered woman finally standing up for herself. What was wrong with that thesis was these were all time-stamped, and they started months before she ever claims there was violence between us. Even the woman's mother, when interviewed by a detective when I was in jail, she said this was not this poor little battered woman. She was getting as good as she was getting. But the district attorney was an ideologue, as are feminists. I don't consider myself an ideologue. I don't consider myself left-wing, right-wing. I mean, an ideologue, you pick a side, and then you're going to have to filter out facts that are inconvenient for that. She was, I will go to my grave believing she was the predator in the situation. I'm sure it's cost me career-wise, but I can sleep at night. I sleep very well, perhaps too well, because I'm not getting the work done that I need to.
That said, you are I think, a prolific writer. If you go to your website, there are nearly 100 articles on various issues, one of which you write, and I thought this was an interesting idea considering how exalted the term is, but you've described equality, which is a very, it's like a cardinal social value in Australia, as one of the most ludicrous notions ever hatched from a human brain. What was the origin of that statement? Could you just elaborate on that?
Well, again, there's a stark difference between treating people equally, which I'm all for, because if we treated men and women equally, at least she would have gone to jail.
Yeah.
But assuming that there's innate blank slate equality is ludicrous. And there's a term for this. It's funny because you hear, I'm not sure what the situation is in Australia, but there's a lot of Christian bashing, and especially because they don't believe in evolution here in the United States.
Yeah.
But at the same time, these liberal creationists, they seem to believe that somehow evolution stopped, and we all wound up at the finish line at the same time. And groups of different continental origins have innately the same abilities. It's just a matter of nursing them out of them or nurturing it. And to me, that makes absolutely no sense. I believe that, different continental climatic differences and all sorts of things, disease, everything else, people evolve differently. I think that, and it doesn't make me a white supremacist. I think most intelligence tests that have ever been developed tend to suggest that Ashkenazi Jews and Asians, especially, I think, Northern Asians, are more intelligent than whites. I'm fine with that. I'm intelligent enough for myself. I don't care. But the idea that everyone's equal and just the demonization and the witch hunting and the lynch mob mentality for even suggesting that people aren't innately equal, you get treated like someone who suggests that Christ didn't rise from the dead in the Middle Ages. It really is this sacred notion that can't be challenged. And they say, well, you have to be a critical thinker. Well, I think I am. What they're into is critical theory, which was developed by the Frankfurt School, who are Marxists. And it starts with this premise of equality and tries to cram all of reality into it. It's not plausible. People are not equal. They should be treated equally. But that's another thing. They talk about a level playing field. The irony is the playing field was level. That's what led to hierarchies. What they're trying to do is tilt the playing field so it ends in a tie. Yeah. Completely different.
Okay. You mentioned that then as that's kind of been quarantined from any criticism, that notion that everyone is equal. Can you give me other examples of, I guess, ideas or sacred cows that fit into that category that say you can suffer career-ending damage for exposing to critical analysis?
And again, I'm not sure what the case is in Australia, but there was, I think he was the president of Harvard. If he wasn't the president of Harvard, he was a bigwig there, Larry Summers.
Yeah.
He suggested there was something about math, and he suggested that women are not as good as math, and he lost his job over it. Well, the evidence suggests that they may not be. There may be a little bit of an innate disparity there. As far as I know, the latest IQ tests say that women may have a slight intellectual edge. I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
I'm okay. That's true diversity. True difference. What's ironic is in trying to force diversity, they want everyone to be the same or at least think the same. And that's another thing that I get into is what switched was they were intolerant of skin color and gender and sexuality. Now they're tolerant of all those things, but if you dare think differently, you will be treated like the other was back then. You will be treated like blacks were, or women, or homosexuals. The hatred that spews from the allegedly tolerant left, who, their basic premise is supposed to be motivated by compassion, is unreal. You look at just any internet forum where they're talking about, this person needs to die, you are scum, you need to be rounded out. It's like, that's the way the Klan thinks. And they don't see it. And I'm okay if you're hateful. I've got plenty of hate in me. I think most people do. I'd rather people be honest about it, though. What's hysterical, and I think it could make for a lot of good comedy, is that these people are just vile and just bursting, bleeding with hatred. But what's funny to me is they're in the name of love. Well, it makes no sense to me, and you can explain it to them every which way, and they act like brainwashed people. They just either they're too dumb or they're too dishonest to acknowledge. Yeah, well, maybe you may be right about that. I've never had a problem with anybody based on their sexuality or skin color. I think generally I get along better with blacks than I do with whites, which is hysterical. I think white liberals generally are cloistered. And there are people that suggest all this anti-racism stuff really has nothing to do with blacks. It's sort of moral status chucking among whites. The richer, more educated whites tend to look down on white trash and rednecks and hillbillies. I did a whole book about that. But
I was going to ask you
in
about that.
America, it was called the Redneck Manifesto. But ironically, it's the rednecks and the hillbillies and the white trash who had to compete with blacks for jobs. They were the original class of slaves in the United States. They tend to live around poor blacks much more than these snooty, incredibly self-righteous rich whites do. I think there was, I can't cite it, so I'm pulling this out of my rear end, but there was some study with at least the 2008 presidential election here. Whites who tended to live around blacks did not vote for Obama as much as whites who were more cloistered.
Okay.
And that's always been the case. I grew up in Philly, which is an incredibly black town numerically, as is Atlanta. And again, just another stereotype completely busted here. I've lived in all four corners of the U.S. I grew up in Philadelphia. I've lived in Los Angeles, lived in Portland. I've never seen blacks and whites get along better than they do in Atlanta, which is crazy.
Now, why is that? What's Atlanta got going for it that other cities don't?
Another irony is the South gets so much flack for being racist. I once wrote a joke that Canada is right to slam the U.S. for its racism because they treat their black person great. The thing is that blacks and whites have coexisted in the South much longer than they have in any other part of America. The South has always been the blackest part of the USA. Blacks really didn't leave the South in large numbers until after World War II. And there is a bit of a shared culture here. They mingle, and I'm not sure people tend to self-segregate no matter what situation they're put in. But I've never seen people friendlier to one another racially than down here in Atlanta. Philadelphia is apartheid.
Does a shared religion have anything to do with that?
It's hard to, when you're in a 7-Eleven buying coffee or getting a Slurpee, it's really hard to tell if someone's a Southern Baptist or not. I'm not sure. But it is Southern culture, and that's what I wrote in the Redneck book, too. They say that whites stole rock and roll from blacks. As far as I think, the British stole it from Americans, but rock and roll is Southern music. Yeah. And there's a lot of intertwining influences there. That every one of these black Delta musicians was using a stringed instrument and singing in English. Those were white influences. Rock and roll is Southern. Elvis was singing Southern music. It wasn't necessarily white or black music.
And
yes, I realized how many people. And he was selling millions, doing Big Joe Turner and Big Mama Thornton, whatever. And, there was some plagiarism there, or cultural appropriation, which is bad, apparently, when white people do it, which may be a good segue into the next topic, which was last week's article about Thor becoming a woman and Captain America becoming black, and Archie of Archie's comics getting murdered for protecting his gay senator. That's to me, that's even more than cultural appropriation. That's cultural pillaging. They're seeking to knock down like every icon. Because there is a prevalent narrative in the left where the word white is used pretty much as a pejorative.
Meaning what? Like an insult, it's a bad thing to be. And so,
this area is so white. And
it's
like, if you imagine if you said it's so black, but the people who are saying that will say that and then go back to their all-white neighborhoods. You've got anti-racist crusaders here. Tim Wise is one of the more fanatical ones. He lives, last I checked, it was like a 97% white neighborhood. Or you look at the staff of Gawker.com or Salon.com, people who are always railing about whiteness, and this corporation isn't diverse enough. They're all overwhelmingly white. They may have one token black, if that. And to me, yeah, it's frustrating, but it's also comical. And
writer Jim Goad, can you tell us then where that comes from? There's almost like a cultural self-loathing then going on. What's the wellspring of that?
I think after about 10, 15 years of writing, I realized the main theme in my writing is guilt projection. I was raised Catholic. I was an accident. I came 12 years after my nearest sibling, and I was called bad just because I became this vessel of my parents' resentment for having to raise me. And I think, and it's a point I make in the Redneck book. These aren't the rich whites who are blaming the poor ones, but the rich whites are much more statistically likely to be descended from slave owners. The poor white trash are much more likely to be descended from indentured servants and convict laborers. It's guilt projection. It leaves poor whites holding the bag. And if they get into a couple fistfights with blacks, it's, well, probably because they live in the same neighborhood. And it's almost an evolutionary competition for space and resources. I tend to think people go astray when they cease to realize that people are animals. And that if things get worse, all this veneer of rainbows and smiley faces will evaporate, and it will just become a survival game. I hope that doesn't come. I hope I'm paranoid and wrong. But at least in the U.S., where we have a $17 trillion debt now, I sense that bad times are coming. I also sense that a lot of the multiculturalism is being pushed. It was Sheldon Adelson, who's a billionaire. I think it was Warren Buffett. It was three of them. Warren Buffett, Sheldon Adelson, and Bill Gates, they just wrote something about amnesty for aliens or undocumented immigrants, as they're calling them now. And it turns out that Microsoft, at least, they just fired 18,000 workers or something. Basically, what appears to be the motivation is they can get foreigners in on visas and pay them a lot less. And if you really follow the money, who's pushing this stuff? Americans have never voted for more immigration. I don't know what the case is in Australia, but it's not the popular will. We don't live in a democracy. The oligarchs or the incredibly wealthy, they manage the society, and they don't care about poor Mexicans. They care about their cheap labor. As far as I can tell, I don't want to impute motives to other people, but that's what the evidence suggests. Back in the 90s, I started wondering, well, why is it the Ford Foundation that's pushing equality? These people don't believe in equality. They live in their gated neighborhoods. They won't rub elbows with the hoi polloi. So I think you're paranoid for doing this. It's like, well, I'd rather be paranoid than gullible.
Well, yes, and you would imagine that and the other theory that I've heard is those people coming in are more likely to vote Democrat too, and so that kind of creates a proletarian base. So there's a political dimension to it. But I just want to ask you, Jim, when you were in Australia, you did notice, obviously it's never far from the news here. It's immigration here is a big issue, and asylum seekers, that sort of thing. Your brief visit here, what currents did you pick up on, and what, from an outsider's point of view, I guess with some distance, how did you view our debate on the same topic?
Well, this was shortly after, how do you pronounce it, Cronulla?
Yeah.
The beach riots.
Yeah.
And, I was bombarded right after I landed with all this multicultural propaganda. And, but talking to, and at least the ones, and again, we're talking about possibly a flawed sample here, but everyone who shepherded me around was very vocal. That there was one guy who said, we're a nation of 20 million, but hovering right north of us is this, Asian continent with 4 billion people. And they talked about how the Lebanese, or as they call them, the Lebos, were raping white women left and right, and the media just, based on this premise of equality, they were terrified to report it because that undermined the narrative. And that they felt that whoever fought back on the beach was justified. And it was funny. It was almost eerie. This guy was telling me this when we got out of the car to go check his P.O. box, and he said that they will try to start fights with you. And a group of swarthy Middle Eastern appearing men walked by and just made eye contact, kind of glaring and kind of smirking like they were picking a fight. And again, this is all subjective, so I'm not sure. And Again, in America, I'm just going from my own subjective experience. But I know there's a lot of guilt for the white Australia policy or white Australian. I'm not sure. And there's, I mean, white people in America and most of the Anglosphere are just absolutely saddled with guilt. And I don't think that's attractive. I don't think it was attractive when black people did when they were shuffling and saying, yes, massa. I don't think self-hatred is attractive in anyone. So if you ask me if I'm a racist, it's like, well, yeah, I kind of hate the way white people are now. They're cowards. I respect pretty much every other ethnicity besides whites a lot more because they stand up for themselves and they stand up for their group interests.
Can I ask you what you? I mean, it's speculating here as Hillary Clinton prepares to run for the presidency. What is your take on her, and what sort of president do you think she would make?
I think the effect and influence the president has is severely overestimated. I'm one of these nuts who think the Federal Reserve calls the shots in America.
Yeah.
And, it's finance. But Hillary, I mean, good Lord, I think one thing I'll focus on, if it becomes evident that she's, at least going to run, there's a lot of documentation. She used to slap the hell out of Bill and scratch his face and throw things at him, which is bitterly ironic to me because she's a big campaigner against domestic violence. But this is one of those things. The narrative has become so warped that even when a woman's hitting a man, that's not domestic violence, or if a black guy is, murdering or beating up a white person and shouting racial epithets at them, that's not a hate crime. People have really been conditioned to that degree. And a term that I used to hear a lot when I was a kid, I'm 53, so I lived through a lot of the Red Scare in America, is brainwashing. And that appears to, these people, I wrote something a couple months ago, like you can tell who spoon-fed them what comes out of their mouths. These people never hatched an original idea in their lives. And somehow they are able to hold these Orwellian contradictory ideas. Well, no, when a woman hits a man, that's not domestic violence. The one thing I'd focus on is that she's a man batterer.
Right.
Otherwise, I really don't know. I mean, she was Secretary of State. She was a senator. I guess those are qualifications. But if she were to be elected, I'd expect, a reign of terror, a sort of anti-male thing, just like we have the anti-white thing in America now. And then Obama is guarded against a lot of criticism just on his skin color. What never gets mentioned is he's mixed race.
Yeah.
But he's always depicted as black. He had a white mother and he was raised entirely by whites. But even on his census form, where you're allowed to check mixed race, he chose black. Probably for political reasons, I'm guessing. He was racist, tried to keep... Well, no. Well, blacks voted for him like in 96%. Somehow that's not racist. And as you mentioned, trying to get Democratic voters. You keep hearing about how Nixon had the Southern strategy to appeal to inbred, retarded, backward white Southerners. It's very likely that he did, but the Democratic Party was the party of the Ku Klux Klan during Reconstruction all the way into the 60s. Actually, more Republicans voted for the Civil Rights Act than Democrats did. And then suddenly, there's a quote attributed to LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, who succeeded John F. Kennedy.
Yeah.
He said, I think he was behind the Civil Rights Act, and
yes,
there's a quote attributed to him that we'll have these, I'm not going to say the word, but you know the word. It starts with we'll have these voting for us for the next 200 years. As far as I can tell, Republicans played racial politics during the Civil War when they wanted to free the slaves. And I'm not pro-Republican. I think the whole system is rigged. But I'm very attuned to hypocrisy. Democrats have always played racial politics. They just kind of switched devils and angels.
Yeah.
And of course they're trying to appeal to, women and non-whites. And there's a writer for Tacky Mag, TAKI, mag.com that I write for. He talks about the crazy glue that holds the Obama coalition together. It's a shared hatred for white males, whether they're blacks or white women, or that's how there's a phrase in leftist politics, intersectionality, where it's like, my oppression beats yours.
Yeah.
That's a fragile, really fragile coalition, because I get a lot of amusements. Well, the transsexuals are angry at the gays or angry at the lesbians, or that's what they have to have is a common enemy, and it's because of white male.
Well,
I posed for the Village Voice in a evil white male T-shirt back 20 years ago, and I never suspected it would get worse. And I'm also often criticized, oh, come on, let it go. That's criticizing political correctness. It's such a 90s thing. And my retort is always, well, did it get better? I mean, back then it was the counterculture. Now it's the culture. Now you can't really speak or think without risking your career. And I'm against, I'm for the existence of anyone who disagrees with me. Just tell me where I'm wrong. But I don't want you to be stamped out or fired or go on these, me grab a torch and go burn your house down. That's crazy. These people are emulating exactly what the lynch mobs were like 100 years ago.
That's
they've
a good point.
taken the same psychological model and just switched to who's good and bad.
We do see that a bit of that here in Australia. It's the last question I'm going to ask you, Jim, because you've been very generous with your time. But in your writings, is there anything so far that you have regretted, any opinion that you've regretted putting on paper?
Regretted? No, I've kind of modified things. In the Redneck book, I said it was all about class, economic class, and that, the elites foster racial division to benefit themselves. I still think they do, and I still think that's going on. But I think back then I didn't believe that there was such a thing as a tribal instinct, and I think there is. I don't have it. I don't care about being white. I could be purple. I'd be fine with it. I may be, Aspergery, autistic, sociopathic. I'm not a social animal. Most people are, and they don't even realize it. But whites have this weird thing going on where they consider themselves good people for hating their skin. So I think that there's that instinct there. Elites only manipulate it. That's really the only major switch in my philosophy. Never regretted a thing I wrote otherwise.
So you've
I just think I was a little. I still think it's a lot about class because I grew up on the wrong side of the track, and I still have some bitterness over how I was raised and the chances I didn't get. But after a while, you grow up and realize, well, you're not going to slay the dragon just to figure out how you can make your own life better. But no, I've written some nasty stuff, but it was all from the heart, and always will be.
Well, on that note, Jim, thank you very much for your time. Now, to get any more of Jim, you can go to jimgoad.net, JIMGOAD. Follow Jim on Twitter at JimGoad. Now, it's about midday over there and you've just had breakfast, so you'll probably be having, dinner at 6 p.m.? Sorry, I mean lunch at 6 p.m., is that how it goes?
Lunch, around 2, dinner at 6, but weekends are hellish for me. This is like 4 years in a row. Every weekend I spend writing on deadline, as I do every day of the week. I need a break. All right. If someone get me a visa, I'll come down there.
Well, look us up if you do come here. You are a fascinating man to speak to, articulate, insightful, and have very much enjoyed our chat.
Thank you, sir.